We'll be talking today with Kevin Brookhauser, who has a new book out, Code in Every Class. He's also the author of the 20 Time Project. Unfortunately, Maggie Pickett can't join us this week due to a family emergency, so we're going to glance a little bit by the tool section, but I will link the tools that she provided this week, which are a set of Google extensions, in our Twitter feed and right here on the podcast link. So look for those. We may touch upon a few of those as we go forward. Many things that we've already talked about before in the past, things like Grammarly, Google Read and Write, Snap to Read, a whole number of those, but they're all kind of put together in one nice, very easy to understand resource. So with that, I want to kick it over, and we're going to probably have a little briefer episode tonight because it's just Kevin and I. We'll miss Maggie quite a bit. So with me is Kevin, and Kevin is in, where are you at in California, Kevin? You're in the northern part, right?
Yeah, I'm in Monterey, California,
Monterey,
just a couple hours south of San Francisco. And Craig, thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited.
Yeah, so Kevin, tell me a little bit about your new book. I didn't even know you had a new one out. So I always think about you as a 20 Time Project guy, and sort of this idea of innovation and project-based learning in the classroom. But talk a little bit about your new one.
Well, through my work with 20 Time Projects, I've noticed that a certain number of my students generally, when they're given the kind of autonomy that a 20 Time Project would give, and I can go in a little more background on what that is. A lot of students choose to take on coding as something that they're interested in, and I started computer programming when I was, I don't know, in like 6th or 7th grade, when I had an Apple IIe, and I was, lucky enough to have that opportunity. And, there's a fair number of students who automatically have that opportunity to pursue computer programming and kind of get a taste of it. But one of the things that I've recognized my work with teachers and schools around the country and around the world is that a lot of students, even with ubiquitous programs like code.org, we still experience a lot of students who go through their entire schooling career without any exposure to computer programming and missing all of the opportunities that go along with some computer programming instruction. And one of the things I notice is in my travels, I notice that a lot of teachers are just kind of taking it on themselves to bring computer programming into the classes that they're already teaching. So they're taking one lesson that they already teach, and then they're implementing a little bit of computer programming. And so what I wanted to do was compile lessons for teachers who realized that giving all students exposure to computer programming was of great benefit to them. My argument is we don't need to wait for our government or administration to really prioritize computer programming. I think we can take on computer programming in the classes that we already teach, give those students that exposure, and also teach students the kind of critical thinking skills, the logic that we want them to use in the main component of whatever discipline that we're teaching.
Huh. Yeah, that's really interesting. I know that already in Iowa, there's some pretty, I don't know if it's how serious it is, but it's at least being talked about in legislative circles about thinking about coding as a language requirement, right? So,
right.
And I don't know how you'd be more dialed into that nationally than I would be, obviously, but I'm not sure how prevalent that is. But I know that we're at least kicking that around here, that the idea that to meet a foreign language requirement or a language requirement or a world language or whatever you want to call it, that coding might somehow fall into that. And that, that does make some sense to me. I got to be honest. And we're thinking about that too. And that's, I think, a really important thing. I mean, certainly we do want to have our kids, everybody get exposure to that now, I think, at least at some level, right?
Absolutely. And, especially regarding the kind of work that you guys are doing in this podcast with making education more accessible and differentiated based on individual students. I know that, there are some students who just simply plain struggle with foreign language classes. And I know that some schools have opened up other types of languages like ASL to those students to give them an opportunity to pursue a field of study that works with them. And perhaps computer science is one of those, or computer languages, coding is one of those languages as well.
Yeah, well, and it's really about strength-based education in my mind at that point, right? I mean, the idea that we ought to be, we certainly can't ignore, there are certain fundamentals that every kid's going to need, but we ought to be finding ways to let kids express those in areas of strength rather than trying to ramrod it through and, kind of the one-size-fits-all model that we all grew up in and that still is pretty prevalent today.
Yeah, well, the education you and I grew up in, Craig, they valued a really narrow set of skills, and often those skills aren't as valued in the real world. Whereas, a lot of students who have a lot of skills that go beyond what those narrow skill sets were that we were all evaluated on. That's where things, providing opportunities for different methods for students to thrive, like 20 time or in coding. That's why I'm so excited about being in education right now.
Yeah, it is an interesting time for that too. And I got to be honest, and I may have mentioned it more than once on this podcast, but I don't know if I've told you this in my previous conversations with you. I was not a good student in my K-12 experience. In fact, I vividly remember graduating from high school and driving out of the parking lot and thinking I am never setting foot in a public school again. So, and that's one of those sort of vivid memories you have. And then, of course, that's exactly what I did with the rest of my life was spend every day in public schools. But it is kind of interesting to see how that works. But I couldn't agree more. I guess my point with that was that I think I'm one of those people who probably had a skill set that wasn't very fell outside the narrow focus you talked about earlier.
Yeah, it was discounted set of skills.
Yeah, and there's things that it takes a while to figure those things out. So, I wrap back around to the 20 time stuff, because not everyone who's listening probably is familiar with that concept. Sure. And that's I don't want to skew away from the coding stuff too early, but I would like to touch upon this so we make sure that whoever's listening has that context, because I think that's really a cool idea.
Yeah, so was it about 5 or 6 years ago, I started doing a lot of work with Google for Education and learning a lot about the Google culture and trying to take some of the insights that they've developed that have made their corporate culture so successful, trying to find ways to use that insight in the classroom to help my students out. And one of their tools or systems that they've implemented in order to maintain their culture of innovation and creativity is to make sure that employees at Google felt empowered to think beyond their job description. So they had, if you look at their job description, there's certain things that they need to accomplish and follow the direction of their managers or project managers. But deeply embedded in Google's culture is to go beyond that. And it's through this thing called 20% time projects. And basically, if a Google engineer sees a problem that they're interested in solving, within Google's culture is the opportunity for those engineers to pursue those problems. Even though they just came up with it themselves, they're given Google's vast resources to pursue those problems, and they can even recruit team members. And as a matter of fact, many of Google's most valuable assets are a result of that 20% time project culture. And so, reading about, this corporate culture that recognizes that it's really important to allow people to pursue projects that they're personally interested, even if it's beyond what their managers recommend. I thought, all right, well, what if I applied that insight to my students? And I said, all right, class, a day a week, I'm going to give you the opportunity to pursue some project that you're interested in. As long as it has a real purpose, I'm going to support you in that program and make it a part of this class.
And so what was your content? And I know the answer to these already, but
right.
But I'm going to give you a prompt. So tell us a little bit about your context. What were you teaching? What type of kids? How old were they? What content? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I was teaching a high school English class, and so one of the initial questions that come up with this idea is, oh my gosh, I've already got so much that I need my students to be doing. I can't take on a brand new project. Well, what I did is I tried to find ways to manufacture my learning goals into the project itself. So as an English teacher, I made it a very writing intensive project. So even if they were pursuing a project that did not involve traditional Englishy type of stuff, I made sure that they were writing about it, which was definitely meeting the learning goals I had for my students. And I found that my students were writing better for this type of project because they were invested in it. Often the question comes up, well, I don't teach English, I teach this other class, math or science or social studies. And can I do a 20-time project in my class? And my answer is absolutely. I've seen it happen across every single possible discipline. The teacher, you as a teacher just need to decide how much you want to make sure that the project involves the curriculum that you're teaching. And I've seen some teachers just be like, I'm not worried about, I'm a math teacher and I'm not worried if I believe that providing students this opportunity is so important that I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of what was in my curriculum. But the majority of math teachers will simply say, all right, well, I just want to make sure that the students they're developing a budget for this project. And that certainly involves math, a pretty compelling piece of math, a part of math that a lot of students don't get any exposure to, and something that's super important, knowing how to create a profit loss sheet and a cash flow and create a budget. A lot of kids get through our entire school system without knowing how to make a budget or how to collect survey data and interpret that survey data. So with science, I've seen students take on these projects that are based upon scientific reasoning, and they're in many ways closely related to a science fair project as well.
So a couple of things that just sort of jump to me as you're talking here is that, there's a really clear connection to something that you touched upon earlier when you were talking about your new book, particularly regarding coding, about the end result of this whole project or whole process being, we really want to foster or engender critical thought.
Yep.
And, these two things seem to dovetail together nearly perfectly in my mind. That ultimately, and this is something I guess I've thought for a long time, is that content, while essential, isn't critical anymore. I mean, maybe I've reversed that around. Maybe it's really important but not essential. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's we want, because we can, and we don't know what our kids are going to need in terms of skill sets for jobs, but we can be sure that they're going to need to be critical thinkers, right?
Yep.
And both these things do that.
Not only that, but they also involve absolutely critical thinking. And if that's all that we accomplish, great, let's do it. But really at the heart of it is problem solving, right? Which is inexorably tied to critical thinking, of course. But allowing students to recognize that they are problem solvers and creative problem solvers, and those qualities, without question, are going to be in very high demand in our future.
Yeah, and we earlier in our run of episodes, we talked to Dr. Scott McLeod. I don't know if you know Scott. But Scott talks a lot about student agency. Yep. And so you have to think about that in terms of your design. But I think that's a lot of what you're touching on there, is this notion that the kids are deeply vested in what they're pursuing at the same time. And I totally agree with you also in your assertion that the problem solving piece is probably the larger component here, because ultimately it's about results, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
right.
So that's all really cool. I know one of the things, I just had to say it out loud because I was thinking it earlier, and I think it's such a cool thing. I know when we had you out a couple of years ago, one of the questions that always comes up, I'm sure you get frequently, is, okay, so you've got kids sort of lined up for this time. You've built the structures, but then the kids, you say, okay, kids, what do you want to do? And they all say, I don't know. And one of the ideas that always struck me that you talked about, I don't know if you still practice this or not, but it did stick with me. It stuck, was the bad idea factory.
Yeah. No, I still do it. Because, I mean, here's what happens, especially for kids who get to my level, like in high school, they've had 10 or so years of schooling that follows this basically an unwritten contract. And the contract goes like this: the teacher tells the student what to do, the student does that thing, and then the teacher evaluates the students on that thing. And you know what the thing is? A lot of students get good at that school, right? They get good at school, and they also get comfortable with it because it's it's somewhat comforting to have someone to tell you what to do, and you do that, and that's pretty easy once you start to figure out that system. And what I was doing was kind of throwing a monkey wrench in that and saying, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You need to come up with this on your own, and it's really important that it is a truly, like you say, a student agency project. The problem is a lot of my students, after having so much of their school career dictated for them, when they're given that autonomy, they don't really know where to start. And so I always kind of, my instinct was to start with a brainstorm session. Let kids come up with any idea. And the golden rule of brainstorming is that there's no bad idea. The problem is when you're working with adolescents, brainstorm doesn't really work because, what kids are really, really concerned about is they may be kind of interested in your content, but what they're really interested in is not embarrassing themselves in front of their peers. Yep. And so in a brainstorm session, kids are constantly have this, I don't want to look stupid in front of my peers editor going on in their brain. And so I got some really boring ideas. That's why I instituted this idea, and it is based off of some of the work Ewan McIntosh from the UK came up with. And it was you can actually generate some really good ideas if your brain is looking for bad ideas. And so that's what I did. I allowed my students to come up with the worst ideas they could think of. And the result was, a lot of students came up with some pretty awful ideas, but it opened the mind up to allow students to come up with some compelling ideas as well.
Yeah, I do. I love that idea because it just is so clever all the way around, and I know it works. I know it works.
It totally works. It's weird. I'm still surprised every time I execute the bad idea factory, and I've done it for college students. I've done it for kindergartners, and it always is kind of chaotic and sometimes a little inappropriate, especially if you're dealing with 7-year-olds or something. But you get through it, and then you're just shocked by the ideas that these kids can come up with. I was recently at Green Hills School in New Jersey. Really an amazing school system. If any of you want to see an innovative district, check out this little middle elementary and middle school district. I saw these kids go through the bad idea factory, and one kid through the bad idea factory decided that he said, I want to make a garbage can that weighs itself. and it was like a garbage can with a Wi-Fi scale built into it.
Yep.
And we started beating that idea up a little bit, and we were like, wow, that's actually an amazing idea. If you think about like Fitbits, how they encourage you to walk simply by virtue of documenting how many steps you make.
Right.
Well, how much less trash would we develop if we knew that the mass of our trash was getting weighed every week?
Yeah, right.
I think we might make different decisions at the grocery store, right?
Yeah.
It's a brilliant little idea. Hasn't been patented yet, so I throw it out there to the world to try to make this device.
No, that's great. That's awesome. But, I think the other thing too, and this is something, that I think about from our perspective, because again, you're saying so many interesting things and there's so many kind of cool ideas popping around in my head right now. And a couple of them are is that one is, you talked earlier about the idea that there's the social contract of school that particularly kids who are higher functioning seem to struggle with. The idea that any change, and boy, did we see that at Prairie full on. We're starting to make a pretty significant shift towards competency-based learning, and we're really into the standards side of that right now. And this whole notion that we're not really sifting and sorting kids anymore, that it's okay for a group of 20 kids all to get A's,
right?
That there's no hierarchy anymore is really disconcerting, not only to kids but to parents as well. So I think that's true. And then the other thing is this idea that what you're describing in both of your books, really, to me, is something that I think this podcast we've tried to talk a lot about, is this notion of personalized learning. And going to again, basing it around the strengths of kids and pushing that forward and planning for it, and being purposeful about that, not just sort of, oh, well, that was a nice happenstance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. And I definitely see it with coding, and my new passion right now is physical computing and working with we're in the middle of this renaissance of circuit boards with Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and all these other boards. And I'm watching kids create amazing projects using these inexpensive circuit boards. And it's like tapping into those kids who just loved Legos growing up. And now they can take that really desire to get their hands on, but also do the kind of really rigorous critical thinking that's required in making these sorts of projects a reality. So that's what I'm most excited about right now, especially along the lines of how it reaches a group of kids that often are seen as unsuccessful in academics.
Yeah. So I had, and probably it's a hole in my professional reading, but I hadn't heard the term physical computing before. So, and I'm guessing others who are listening probably haven't either. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's an official term or not, but
that's a cool term. So
I think it might be. But anyway, the way I think about it is any sort of computer programming that involves what are called actuators, and so things like servos and motors and
robotics, kind of.
Buttons, and basically getting your hands dirty with wires and soldering and electronics. I kind of think of it, so I'm now teaching this really great class called Code and Design, and it's a combination of computer programming and product development course. So it's kind of like 20 time turned 100 time. and basically with all of these tools, kids, it's like shop class, but with computer programming involved. So not only are we working with tools developing working with wood and different plastics, but we're also inserting electronic components as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and so in a lot of ways, around the parlance around here would be like maker spaces, that sort of thing, but even more sort of coding based than that. Whereas sometimes a maker space could be, more just straight up creation rather than code based. Huh. Cool. So, you travel, you're still kind of, sounds like you're moving all over the country. You referenced the school in New Jersey that's doing some interesting things. Are there any interesting sort of tools or processes? I'm asking a very vague question here, I realize, but I'm trying to see what's cool out there that you've seen recently that we might not have heard about or seen in our neck of the woods. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this trend, but I guess what's most exciting to me is the adoption of Chromebooks, and that's not just because I'm a Google fanboy, which I most certainly am a Google fanboy, no question about it. But I am just incredibly excited about seeing Moore's law continue into education, and the fact that we can now get closer and closer to that one-to-one reality that we've all been talking about for a long time. It's now starting to become possible that we can put a computer in the hand of every student, regardless of their economic situation. And I guess I'm most excited about that because of the digital divide. Like, this allows us to narrow that digital divide. Those students who do have access to technology are just so much at an advantage over those who don't. And I'm still enthusiastic and optimistic that is narrowing. But the other thing that I'm also really excited about is Raspberry Pi. I think that this is going to be the coolest thing. This is the coolest thing out there. It's a $30 computer, and you can. It looks like a microchip, right? So it's exposed. But not only is it an inexpensive computer that pretty much anybody can afford, and now it's got Bluetooth, it's got Wi-Fi, it's got a bunch of USB ports. You just plug it into a monitor and you've got a computer. So $30, it's even way cheaper than a Chromebook. But then you can also tap into the what are called the GPIOs, the general purpose inputs and outputs on this thing to build a robot, right? And to do that kind of physical computing that I'm so excited about. And I'm really excited this summer to be going to the Pi Academy. It's the official Raspberry Pi Academy.
Where's that at?
So they have them all over the world, actually. I'm going to be going to the one in California, down in Southern California, in Irvine this summer. There's 2 sessions, and then there's another one in Rhode Island, and there's one up in Boise. But if you just go to raspberrypi.org, you can look up the Pi Academy, and you'll see that they're offered around the world. Yeah,
that's really an interesting point too. I mean, we deploy for our size of district, at least, about 6,000 kids. We have over 3,000 Chromebooks.
I remember that when I visited you a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's insane. Well, and we buy a lot of MacBooks too. I mean, we're really spread all over the place. But it's kind of interesting. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway. I'm doing the bidding for the summer adoption. We're going to buy another 700-800 this year.
Yeah.
And the price point on these things is just insane. I mean, from the point we started adopting them, 2.5 years ago, they've halved in price, and it's not an exaggeration. I mean, that's like $150.
Right.
They're crazy inexpensive for what they do.
Are you getting to the point where kids can take them home?
Oh, we send them home for all of our kids in 6th through 9th grade.
Good.
And they keep them all year. In fact, we don't take them back till they're in 9th grade, when we take them in and usually just sort of put them in the parts pile.
Yeah, right. Well, what you can do is you put them in the parts file, and if you find any that they're just toast. You take a Raspberry Pi, you can disassemble the monitor and the other components, and you can breathe life back into it.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. We'll have a parts pile of these things that's pretty significant. This is just finishing up year 2. It seems like a little longer, but
right.
Like I said, in that, over the course of that time, it's really interesting though, because like I said, we send them home for the summer. We don't see these devices again. I mean, they go into kids' hands, and we don't see them again till the next time around. It's really interesting because it's way different than our MacBook deployment, which, we like our MacBooks. I won't lie, but still we're in the process right now of intaking about 1,200 of those things, and because they're a little higher value device, I mean, you need to have a little tighter process about, who has what, and what are the repairs and all this. But with the Chromebooks, I mean, literally, I don't say this too loudly. I sure hope that parents and kids maybe aren't listening to this, but we really think about them as consumables. I mean, it's like a workbook, man. And it's a really interesting phenomenon. And that's one of the reasons why we're really doing this podcast, frankly, is that, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think there's a really interesting thing. And here in Iowa, as I told you earlier, there's some insane number. It's like 70+% of the schools have some sort of really significant one-to-one. And, I think that we're still, if you want to think about it with, the old SAMR model, I think that a lot of our work, and I would throw Prairie into this as well, is still at the substitution level stuff. It's kind of low hanging fruit.
Right.
Engaged in a lot of the deeper, as you described, the critical thinking and problem solving. I mean, I think we're trying. It's just really hard to do that. I mean, the structures don't really lend themselves well to it, and practice makes it pretty hard to get there. But there's just so much opportunity out there, and there's so many interesting things. One of the things we're doing right now is we belong to an assistive technology grant from the Iowa Department of Education, and they've allowed us to purchase Google Read and Write, the subscription-based one, for all of our kids.
Nice.
You talk about a game changer, though.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
we actually just confirmed we're definitely buying that for our school this summer.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing game changer, right? I mean,
it's amazing.
Kids can have text narrated to them. They can dictate. There's all sorts of ways to build vocabulary lists and interact from a literacy standpoint. That's really cool. But for me, it's kind of like, if we can kind of retool our design and our teaching to meet some of those sorts of capabilities, and that's it's a relatively simple tool at its core,
Right. No, but I just went through a demo of Read and Write with our academic dean, and tipped me over the edge and made me say, we've just got to do this, was the moment I realized that you could take a PDF or a Word document and immediately press a button and it converts that document into an MP3 file.
Yes.
And to think that I could be a student at school, oh, there's that document my teacher wants me to read for homework, turn it into an MP3 file. I'm a busy athlete or something like that. I can throw that onto my phone and listen to that on the bus ride or on the commute. Craig, I mean, when we were in school, that would have been considered cheating.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly. But it's craziness. And the thing is that it's the other way too. I mean, we tell a story that my one of the people I work with is she's fantastic, and unfortunately, it's wonderful for her, but she's moving on to another opportunity, a neighboring school district. It's a nice job promotion for her. But I don't know if you've ever watched Parks and Rec, the TV show.
Yeah.
So she's Leslie Knope. She's Leslie Knope. So she's the director of secondary curriculum for the district. I mean, we're not an insignificantly sized district, I mean, we're not huge, but it's 6,000 kids.
Yeah, it's big.
And so she was an English teacher. She's not old. She's but she was an English teacher in her previous life. And one of the people in the English department at the high school was on maternity leave. So she just decided that, I'll pick up and I'll teach one of their sophomore lit classes.
Yeah.
Just because she had nothing else to do, of course, because they had a sub leave, the long-term sub left. Anyway, long story short is that we had rolled out Read and Write to this class, and she had happened to know a few of the kids, and one of the young men who had not worked on his personal narrative, she showed him the dictate feature, where he could actually just dictate what he wanted to complete this. And he looked up and he said, "I can do this?" "No." And he used the word, he said, well, "No crap." And that wasn't what he said. He used the more expletive version, and she said, "Well, no crap." Right back at him. And the thing was he did it. I mean, his work was done then. So that was an access to the world that he didn't have. Now, he didn't have a disability. He didn't have he didn't have an IEP, but, this work was kind of in a way inaccessible to him before that.
Right.
And now he's suddenly doing it. And you're right. 10 years ago, that's cheating, I think.
Yeah, and I think some people may still think that it's cheating, but I have no patience for anybody who believes that our goal is to make learning hard for students. I mean, but I think that there's still some people out there who believe that, simple things like posting assignments on a website is cheating students. I want my students' path to learning material, and more importantly, being creative and being critical thinkers. I want to pave that path as well as I can for them, because what that allows them to do is take on much more interesting and more difficult problems.
Right. I mean, and it's about the idea that the rigor should come from the process and not from an artificial construct that we're putting over the top of it, or from some notion of equity or fairness. which
Right.
I think sometimes is also misconstrued into that. Well, it's not fair. Nobody else did that, but that's, I think, at the heart of where we're at. I mean, we live in a world where we're continually offered personalized services more and more and more.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to, look upon those as essential and as sort of every day. I mean, and for us not to do this with education seems to me to be kind of a, I'll just say it seems to be a malpractice to me.
Yep.
So, well, Kevin, we've kept you for about 30 minutes here, and it's just been you and I talking. Like I said, sure wish Maggie could have been here tonight. Hope everything works out with her family situation. I'm sure it will, but I'm going to respect your time and kind of wrap it up here. Is there anything that we didn't touch upon that you want to make sure that people listening absolutely sort of know before we wrap up, or are we good?
Yeah, we're good. I'll just invite people to look me up online. I'm the only Kevin Brookhauser out there, so I'm on all the things.
He is easy to find, folks.
Yeah.
And again, check out the 20 Time Project and Code in Every Class. The two new ones, right? That's a new one. So again, thank you so much, Kevin. We appreciate you stopping by today, and take care.
Great. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.